I'm Chris,
I'm Wakas.
I'm Shraf.
and our topic is the nature of science, which consists of the scientific method, the 7 practices of science, chi-square, percent error, and standard deviation.
The scientific method was created by a scientist named Francis Bacon. The scientific method was used to answer a question through forming a conclusion. It is used through forming a hypothesis, analyzing the data, and then forming a conclusion to answer the question.
Now we'll talk about the 7 practices of science. The 7 practices of science are guidelines structured for AP Science students to effectively run experiments and derive conclusions that can be applied across all domains. The 7 practices of science must be adhered to at all times in order to ensure the validity of the data and make sure the experiments are run effectively and efficiently.
Next, we're going to talk about chi-square. Chi-square is an equation often used to determine the validity of a set of data. Chi-square also tests what is known as the null hypothesis, which states that the results of an experiment will not be affected by a certain factor. Chi-square is done by comparing observed and expected values. After the number for chi-square is determined, it is compared to a table which is influenced by the degrees of freedom of a situation. And if the chi-square value is above the accepted value, which is obtained from that same table, then you are to fail to reject the null hypothesis. And if your chi-square value is under that accepted value, you are to reject the null hypothesis.
And now I'll talk about percent error. The percent error formula is used to show how close your data is compared to the calculated value. This can determine the validity of the data. This is important because it shows how close your experimental value is compared to your theoretical value.
Finally, we're going to talk about standard deviation. Standard deviation is an equation used to determine how much the data varies in comparison to the mean. And to calculate this, first you must determine the variance of the data, and then after that, square root that value, and then you get your standard deviation value. And a low standard deviation value corresponds to a tight spread around the mean of the data points, and a high standard deviation value corresponds to a high spread of data points across the mean value.
In conclusion, the nature of science consists of the scientific method, the 7 practices of science, chi-square, percent error, and standard deviation. The scientific method is a method used to answer a question by obtaining a conclusion. The 7 practices of science is a method for AP Biology students to achieve accurate results through an experiment. Chi-square is used as a method of obtaining the validity of a set of data. Percent error is used to find how far off one's experimental values differ from the expected values. Standard deviation is used as a method of obtaining the distance of a set of data from the average.